Hi, everyone. My name's Jared Thomas. I'm an IT project manager here at Edwards Air Force Base. I'm also the TEDx organizer for TED Talks. And so essentially, we're putting together a TED Talks event next April, and we're focusing on inspiring the airmen of 2030 in cyberspace and AI. One of the things that we're also wanting to focus on is, demystifying what Edwards Air Force Base is and does. We tend to focus a lot on stealth technologies, so like the B-2 bomber. We're doing hypersonics, which means flight that has a lot to do with, going past the sound barrier, past the speed of sound, being able to do aeronautics in that regard. And then the other thing that Edwards is predominantly recognized for is its testing. So being able to test anything that has to do with engine capabilities, fighter jets and things like that. And so anyway, between the cyber technologies as well as the what Edwards is, we're trying to put together an event in April. And if anyone has any questions regarding that, please feel free to reach out to our team, and we'd love to connect with you, especially to explore your interest, because everyone here, all the students that are part of this stream will possibly be the airmen of 2030. So we'd love to hear from you and hear your thoughts, and love to connect sometime. So in regards to my background, I grew up in Lancaster, Palmdale, out here in the Antelope Valley. To a single mom. I have a twin brother. We grew up, out here since about early 2000s, 2001. Graduated from Lancaster High School, and being half Hispanic, my mom told me that in order to be quote-unquote successful, I have to either be a doctor or a lawyer. I found out that, trying to become pre-med, that math and science was actually very challenging for me in particular. One of the things that I was encouraged when I first started college is that I have an innate ability for being able to communicate really well with people and being able to use my language, use my soft skills to be able to, just kind of figure out my way through. And with that encouragement, I ended up, pursuing a bachelor's and ultimately a master's degree in English. Went from AVC to CSUN. A big reason I got into CSUN was because I did track and sports throughout all of high school. So I ended up getting on the track team at AVC, where I did the 400-meter run, as well as pole vaulting. I don't know if you guys remember, but pole vaulting is where you take that big 15-foot pole and you just stick it in the ground and you kind of fly over a crossbar. And so I got recruited to be on the track team for that at CSUN, while pursuing a bachelor's and ultimately a master's in English. The things I really enjoy are, very cerebral things, like things that have a lot to do with, deep thinking about like really existential things, like what is life, what back in high school I really wanted to define, like, how do you define what love is, or does God exist, and things like that. And so that trend, went through all out college, and so I started studying things like, creative writing, critical thinking, and, philosophy, psychology. And so that really started crafting, my experience, in the university. And by studying creativity, I managed to, become one of the go-to people at the university for, talking about these really, broad topics. And I ended up becoming a professor at CSUN when I was a grad student. And so we ended up, I taught freshman composition. So I would take my students and we would, just go through the curriculum and, just help them with their writing skills. But the more important thing was, I developed a curriculum that wasn't really stuck on, the students need to be able to write this way, because I know a lot of people just don't really care for writing, or, they won't remember my class in when they graduate in, 3 to 5 years. So what I did was I ended up having my students, volunteer, for Habitat for Humanity, and we talked a lot about class. Instead of it being, I lecture to you, it was more of like a debate. So I set up the class where, I'd help them understand and find their voices ultimately. Because I think that, especially now, since everyone is so tech savvy, that, it's really important to develop your soft skills, right? Like everyone's kind of, they're either staying at home, playing video games, they're on their phone texting each other all the time. The idea of being social means like, I've got lots of friends online, or, depending how many shares or likes I get on this particular platform like Instagram or TikTok or whatever it is. But you don't really develop a lot of social skills in terms of like, being able to read people's body languages, being able to use, things that don't autocorrect, right? So in text message, you autocorrect yourself all the time. So I really tried to help my students understand that there's a lot of benefit to being able to just, engage with one another back and forth, so you can understand what other people's perspectives are. You can be able to, go back and forth, to understand opposing points, or maybe you agree with certain people's perspectives and you kind of go from there. I feel like that experience really helped me develop, not only just the creativity part of things and understanding, that there are really abstract things out there that I can wrap my heads around, but being able to voice yourself and understand what your opinions are on certain things, right? Especially if it comes to, politics, which a lot of people like to talk about, or about your own individual experiences, what have you. And so while I was a grad student and a professor at the same time at CSUN in English, I ended up working in IT for the university, and I was essentially what's known as a technical writer. And all that means is basically, like, to demystify it a little bit, is that I would write instruction manuals, like just to kind of be able to walk people through the different types of softwares and things that we were developing for the university, and help, both leadership and the executive vice presidents and also the software engineers be able to communicate with each other, right? So that the software engineers they develop their platform or whatever it is they're working on, and I would be able to communicate that to leadership so they understood, exactly what they were getting for what they were asking, and make sure it's reasonable, right? You can't say, oh, I want a toaster with laser beams on it, and the software developer's like, why would I want something like that? It's not really tangible. Who knows? Maybe you might want to, develop some kind of fun project for DoD or something like that. But so after that experience, that was my first experience in IT, and I learned very quickly that there is a dramatic need for a lot of soft skills, like a lot of being able to communicate with people, a lot of being able to interact, and advocate, which means essentially you are the go-to person to get things done, or to coordinate between a lot of different people. Because, for example, if you're working for, people that are rocket scientists, right? The best thing for rocket scientists to do with their time is to focus on building rockets. They're not going to be the ones that will champion to go out and find, stakeholders or find people that are interested in rockets. They're not the ones that will go and argue for the funding of their program for the rockets. That's a job for other people, such as myself, in being an IT project manager. It means that I am managing the project that involves a lot of different people simultaneously. And that's kind of how I kind of built into getting into the Air Force. After my first master's degree, I tried to diversify myself by getting into a lot of different things. I ended up pursuing a second master's degree from USC in a department called Sol Price School of Public Policy. So I got what's called a Master's of Public Administration. It's called an MPA degree. And again, it's quite the soft skill focused type of degree. We do study things like economics and statistics and things like that, but a lot of it has to do with policy making, advocacy training, public administration, which essentially means like being able to work with, again, stakeholders. My focus was on city government as well as innovation and technology. I love the idea of city government and local government because it has a lot to do with managing problems that society is facing from the ground level, like being able to innovate with how fire departments respond to certain situations, or how the city will track the well-being of their city, and opportunities by getting businesses to come over. Having grown up out here in Lancaster-Palmdale, I understand very clearly, how much of a networking desert it is out here. And so I really want to encourage people to, keep in touch with our hosts, and I'd love to, be able to come and help break that barrier and being able to connect and have some kind of professional network out there. I'm happy to look at resumes, whatever the case is. And so, that type of facilitation also happens here at Edwards. Edwards Air Force Base is much like a city. The size of Edwards Air Force Base, just so that everyone is aware, is about the size of Washington, D.C. in terms of like the geographic location of the entire base. And so I think that's really fascinating. So it's basically a city within, that is neighboring Lancaster-Palmdale. It's much larger than Lancaster-Palmdale in terms of its geography. So with all that said, I came into Edwards Air Force Base by simply just pursuing my curiosities. To reiterate or to re-explain, I really like creativity, and by getting into the public sector, this natural progression of admiring this idea of creativity and the creative process. I studied how, what is the origins of creativity. That natural progression kind of got me towards understanding, what is innovation? How do you define innovation? How do you apply technology to innovation? How do you leverage innovation and technology in synergy with each other? And so I really, I've done a couple startups. I work with some people in Silicon Valley. I know a lot of people at Facebook, at the Nextdoor application. I've met city mayors and things like that, and everyone is talking about, how to be strategic and how to be entrepreneurial. What does that mindset really mean? And again, to demystify that, it's really not a hard question. It has nothing to do with, being an uber smart person. All being innovative means is that you have identified a problem and you have a proposal to solving that problem with whatever it is, whether it's an innovative idea in terms of you design something that is really interesting, or you leveraging a certain technology, right? And an example would be, we can get into Facebook. Facebook was a very innovative technology for its time. Back then, people would connect with each other via phone, right? We didn't have platforms to be able to connect with each other. So during that time, it was considered and heralded as an innovation of the future. Now, innovation is very different. We're getting into more technology-based type of things. I really think that you can have innovation that is like a hard component of technology, or you can have innovation that is more soft, right? Like being able to connect with people, or being able to develop, advocacy groups like nonprofits that will impact society. There's a new field of study that is coming out that is becoming more and more popular, that breaks away from, making a startup that has to do with making money for the sake of making money, and it's called social innovation. Another one is being a social entrepreneur, and all that means is basically that being able to build a business that has impact on society. A good example would be a company called Kiva. Essentially, they take crowdfunding similar to, I forgot what the crowdfunding was, the popular crowdfunding application was, GoFundMe. It takes an application like GoFundMe, and you're able to crowdfund, in third world countries. So in India, if somebody wants to start their own, startup, like a pizza store, for example, right, and they don't necessarily have the money to be able to start their own pizza business, they will go to this application like GoFundMe called Kiva, crowdfund from, places like the United States or Europe, and be able to get their startup funding and pay it back when they're capable of making money and paying it back. And I say this because that innovation identified a problem, which is in other countries, how do people get money in order to start businesses? And they took a current solution of GoFundMe that exists within our world, and they just made it, adapted it to be available for third world countries in, India, Africa, South America. And that's all it means to be innovative, right? And everyone here, I guarantee you, is plugged in, right? Everyone uses social networking. Everyone uses technology. You grew up with cell phones. You play video games all the time, right? So being able, you already have the everything there available to you. You just need to get out there in the world and understand that there are what strategic developments are in place. And I'd be and that's where networking comes in. And again, I'd be happy to connect and possibly give presentations or be able to talk to your teachers about like how to make that possible and all these strategic things that I am aware of. Another example would be, I know there's some movement in the Antelope Valley to making the Antelope Valley, Lancaster, Palmdale, Rosemond, the aerospace capital of the United States. Because we currently have the ecosystem for that. Lockheed Martin is out here, Boeing, NASA, the Air Force. We've got the Palmdale Airport. We've got Fox Field. We've got Edwards again. And so being able to bolster that with a startup community to, test out hydrogen planes, to be able to test out, electric planes, things like that. Developing that infrastructure locally so that people can test these things and have successful businesses, and that's what it means to be sort of a manager of a lot of different things. And I consider myself a generalist, right? Where I am good at all these different things and facilitating, but I'm not really quite the master of any particular one thing. Because again, I believe that people that are subject matter experts, that are scientists, that are, dedicated to their one field of expertise, they deserve to stay in that one field of expertise because that is where they excel. And I want to try to develop a future where I can facilitate that stuff for people and, young professionals such as yourself. And, helping you gauge your interests is something that I really, really love to do for anybody that I meet, quite frankly. So that's just my background on being a professor, I suppose. I guess it was a good fit in that regard. I remember when they asked me if I wanted to be a professor, I said no, just because I didn't really know what it meant, but they hired me anyway. So that's kind of how it works. I was I wasn't really an ideal teacher. I kind of went against the grain, and I didn't want to teach what the university was assigning. I thought students want to be able to voice themselves. They want to be able to articulate and figure out like how the world works, not understand how punctuation works, in all the tens and dozens of different facets that it is. So so again, I feel like if you pursue your strengths, understand how you learn, right? Because that, I think, is kind of a call to college, right? It's not so much that you're aiming for like, oh, I want to be a doctor, I want to be a lawyer, I want to be a scientist. It's more learning along the way of like essentially what works for you. Like, I had to fail, 2 English classes before I understood, the basics of writing, and then I started really taking off at that point. Another one is, was a pre-med at one point because, again, I tried to, satisfy my mom, by trying to be a doctor of the family, and ended up, failing every math and science class that I got my hands on. And once I failed my summer trig class, I realized, like, wow, I am not good at math, right? So now I know where to go, and I know where not to go, right? Because it's just not, my brain just doesn't operate in that way, and it wasn't any hang up to anybody. Like, I thought I would take it very personally, like I wasn't smart enough, but that's not the case, right? I just have different strengths and weaknesses that works for some, but it just didn't work for me. And so, I just want to encourage people that college isn't so much, don't treat it as like a hoop to jump through so that you can just have a bachelor's and just move on with your life. Use college as a way to be able to learn about yourself, being able to learn what works for you. Like, if flashcards work for you, if watching YouTube tutorials works for you, or if being able to network with people and talk back and forth about, like, what's possible and what's not possible, or, you got to figure out what works for you. And I was just stubborn. I spent 12 years in college, and I can't get enough of it because it's more like I just keep chasing my curiosity about things. I keep chasing, these ideas of innovation and being able to help people, and how can I become the person that can help people the most, right? So with that said, I'll go ahead and leave it to Q&A so that I can give everyone ample time to, so we can talk about things. So I'm happy to toss things over.
Okay. Got one question for you. You're talking about innovation. So in your opinion, what are the challenges then to innovation?
I think the number one challenge to innovation is people's ability to build it up more than it needs to be, right? This idea of innovation has become so grandiose. Like, it's become, like this mountain that people have to climb, and it's only once you get to the peak that you're quote unquote successful. It's not really that big of an obstacle. I feel like a lot of people measure being innovative when you've found the solution or the cure to, cancer, for example. There's years that take to get to that point, right? And all it takes is figuring out that there is a problem and that you have, again, an answer, a designated solution. An example would be, like I mentioned with Kiva, but there's another one where, I think off the top of my head, let's say you want to solve homelessness, for example, right? That means that, okay, so what do you want to solve when it comes to homelessness? Do you want to get them off the streets? Do you want to get them jobs? Do you want to help train them? Do you want to help them with resume building? And what you have to do is identify what current things exist out there by doing a market study. Figure out if there's any kind of gaps in those proposed solutions, and see if you can possibly fill them up, or if you can find a solution that covers them all. If you want to get more into the private sector, right? Private sector innovations have a lot to do with consumerism, right? They have a lot to do with making money for the sake of making money, which, again, there's this new movement called social entrepreneurism, where, again, there's more focused on impact. If you want to get into technology, SpaceX, with their rocketry, he wants to go to Mars, but he wants to be able to do that. How can he do that? In talking about Elon Musk, right? How can he go from nothing and having, a car factory to going to Mars? Like, what is that gap? Cost is the biggest gap. Being able to have not have to rebuild your rockets every single time. So that's the biggest barrier that he has to navigate, and that's the innovation that he has brought to the 21st century with reusable rockets, right? He just happened to have this vision. He identified the problem, which is funding, and he proposed the solution of, getting people together to build this, spectacular innovation of our time.
So what skills then do you need to be able to innovate?
I think one of the biggest skills is patience. You know, being able to see through things. I've done 2 startups myself, and so that means that I've been a part of, like, let's say, like classrooms, right? Like where I have colleagues that, you know, a bunch of room of innovators or entrepreneurs, and those are just fancy titles. You know, you don't have to think; they're just problem solvers. Let's put it that way. So, you know, some people have, you know, great ideas, you know, that they've thought through. They've understood that there is a problem and that there are people that need this solution more than anything else. Or if, you know, even if they're investors, like they just want to make money, right? That is a solution that they're looking for. The biggest obstacle is patience. People have ideas, but then they understand, like, man, this is not going to be an easy, you know, I'm going to become a millionaire with over summer with this idea. It's like, no, you have to build that product. You have to build the beta of that software. You have to build the prototype of whatever it is that you are envisioning or dreaming of. And that takes a lot of time, and it takes a lot of money, because people most of the time won't do things for free, right? So you got to pay them somehow. So, you know, there are startup fees. There's pre-seed money out there. There's, you know, venture capital funding out there, right? And that takes a lot of time to be able to network that, to be able to, you know, identify problems and also what other competition you have out there, and just understanding the whole ecosystem and the field that you are, you know, pursuing to get to that direction. And so having the follow through is really, really important, you know, because again, most successful companies don't lift off within a year or two. Like Elon Musk, you know, with his SpaceX company or Tesla, he started that idea in the early 90s. It didn't get traction for about a decade before he started getting successful. So there's a lot of investment that you have to do time-wise. So definitely be patient, talk to people about your idea, and try to validate it over and over and over. That's a scientific process, right? You gotta validate your assumptions. You gotta question yourself, like, is this a good idea, right? I had somebody that was designing. Here's an example, right? When it comes to designing a startup, somebody was developing luggage, like, you know, the luggage that you would take to the airports, and they developed like a phone case, like basically like a plastic case that would go like similar to this, right? That would go around your luggage when you travel. And I immediately asked her, I was like, so why would you want to cover your luggage, you know, when you travel? To protect it from what? From damage? And, you know, she designed it with the idea in mind that she has designer luggage. That's what she has. That's the standard. And she wants to prevent it from being damaged. That's the problem. But I told her, I was like, you know, there's not much of a market out there that would buy covers for designer luggage, because people that buy designer luggage want to be able to show off their designer luggage. That's the whole point. It's like fashion to them, right? So there's a customer, you know, difference there that she needed to keep in mind, right? Like, and that's where empathy kind of comes in, right? Being able to understand people's perspectives, right? Being able to understand, like, if I build this product, this consumer will use it in this way. Or if I'm solving this problem, right, this problem will react, or these customers will move in this particular way. And I really enjoy those kinds of things. So, yeah.
Okay, so this next question goes back to you as far as what you do here as an IT project manager. What exactly does that mean?
Yeah, so again, great question. As an IT project manager, you would assume that I was a subject manager in information technology, IT. That's not necessarily the case, right? I am not particularly incredibly knowledgeable about, you know, anything IT. Like there's people that are really great at being able to troubleshoot a computer. There's people that are really, you know, phenomenal at setting up servers or developing software or being able to, you know, build a computer from scratch. I was essentially hired at Edwards Air Force Base because of my communication skills, being able to be the liaison between the people that want something in particular and the people that actually can build that certain something for the client. And so I essentially go around and facilitate projects throughout the base. I have to talk to contracts. I have to talk to the subject matter experts. I have to talk to the engineers. I have to talk to leadership. I have to talk to everyone that's involved in a project to make sure that that project, is successful and is completed. Projects that I can share, things like cell towers, laying fiber optics cables throughout the base to improve wireless technologies, Wi-Fi capabilities, changing switches and servers, which that just means you have to understand that a lot of businesses, a lot of industries, a lot of infrastructure, especially in government, is a little antiquated. It's a little out of date. And so there's a lot of effort to be able to, get the money, that is needed in order to update these systems. And so I'm responsible for a lot of that once it gets to my desk, essentially, right? And so, yeah, that's what it means to be an IT project manager here. So again, it's not so much I'm this guy that is the Swiss Army knife of anything technology on the base, right? I'm like this really top-notch, computer analyst or computer engineer. No, it's more or less me being able to facilitate, successful, projects, essentially.
So that being said, and you talked about needing soft skills in innovation, and you mentioned patience. What are some of the other soft skills?
So patience is definitely when it comes to being an innovator or an entrepreneur, being able to see things through, learn what's necessary. Another one would be, as I mentioned, empathy. Being able to see yourself in someone else's shoes. And it's not so much like, you're a bleeding heart for, someone else in their situation. It's more or less just understanding what their needs are. If somebody were to come up to me and give me, a 5-minute, 10-minute explanation of their circumstance or their situation, I can immediately identify, here are the 5 paths forward. Oh, I can recommend you to this network, or I can recommend you to this, technology or something that is useful for them to be able to move forward, whether that's emotionally, professionally, technologically. There's a lot of ways to just be resourceful, to be helpful. So yeah, so patience, empathy, communication skills, listening skills is tremendous, right? You can't really have much empathy without having strong communication skills. I think that's why my class was so dumbfounded when I was teaching them, because I wasn't just, vomiting all this, academic knowledge and understanding at them. It was saying I am the expert of English, you have to listen to me kind of a thing, because I am the voice of authority and all that is English. No, not even. I actually listened to them. I said, hey, what do you want me to teach you this semester? And they had no idea how to respond to that. I said, please tell me what you want to get out of this class, because you're not going to remember me in 3 or 4 years. You're not going to remember anything about this class. You're not going to remember the paper that you wrote. So they said that they wanted to get resume experience. They said they wanted to get actual experience from this class that can transfer into the real world, which is why, again, I got them to volunteer with Habitat for Humanity as a final for my class. And during that entire semester, I had them write papers that had to do with them volunteering for Habitat for Humanity, where they built a home for a veteran. And so they, in having them prep for all that stuff, they wrote 3 papers leading up to that project. They can now speak to, what it means to be a veteran and getting a home through the Habitat for Humanity program. It's called Vets to Home, or Veterans for Homes, or something like that. And so it's they're now a subject matter expert in the nonprofit world, which is Habitat for Humanity. It's a public sector type of ecosystem, and also what it means to be a veteran and all the statistics and research that led up to that. So people can, reach out to them for their opinions on the subject, right? And so that's what it means. You got to be a good listener, and by me listening to them, I develop that class, and that class was really well regarded in the university, and it set a new standard for being able to break what a classroom is. Just getting outside of the box of just a snooze fest of a class of me just lecturing, right? So it was quite fun.
So for the age group that's dialing in or logging in for this, how can they foster those soft skills as they're growing, as they're taking their classes? I mean, they may or may not have these opportunities. How do they do this?
So that is a tremendous question, especially when it comes to opportunities. Having grown up out here, right, I felt the exact same way. I'm an introvert. I was a very shy kid growing up. I still am very much an introvert now. I just happen to be very good at public speaking because I've polished my skills, I've practiced. I would encourage everyone to put your phones down, unplug, right? Because you're not going to really make much progress in being able to be a good public speaker, being able to talk to people normally, right? Because I think that there's a difference between how people interact with each other online with their online avatar or whatever you think that you look like online compared to being in person, right? There's nothing like networking with people in person. So if you're in, elementary or middle school, just get out there and interact with people, right? Don't be afraid to ask questions. That's probably the biggest one. I've always been very outspoken because when I see something that is kind of the elephant in the room and nobody will bring it up, I'm always the one that will mention it, right? I remember in class, the professor, something had happened and nobody was going to say anything. And I was always the one that was like, this kind of doesn't feel like the right thing that we should be studying, or what does this have to do with, what we're learning in class? And asking that question that is on everybody's mind is really, really, really important because it means that you're willing to take the initiative, you're willing to go out there and just engage with people. Like, for example, just because I'm older now, and I thought this when I was in middle school, I had a hard time just asking, people about stuff. Like, if I met somebody like myself from Edwards Air Force Base that is an IT project manager, I wouldn't want to talk to him. I wouldn't know what to talk to him about. I have somebody that is a co-founder in Silicon Valley, and he's doing his own startup out there. He asked me, he's like, so how do you network so well? And I was like, well, I don't specifically go out with the idea that I'm going to, network with people. Like, I'm going to get their business card. And by me getting this business card means that I'm successful at networking because I have this stack of business cards that I'm not going to do anything with, right? No, what I do is I go to conferences. I go to, professional gatherings. I go to, just any kind of networking event. And it's not that I have the inherent, I'm not like the subject matter expert. I just go there with questions in mind and, go up to the people that are the professionals and just ask them questions, right? They're human just like you. I grew up out here just like a lot of you, right? So, I know where you're coming from. I know where you've been. I'm half Hispanic, right? So it's like, there's a lot of things that can be discussed that, a lot of people have a lot of insight to. So don't be afraid to ask anything.
That's awesome. You mentioned startups, though. So if someone is interested in doing that, or they think they may have an idea at some point, I would like to take that route, how do they even get started?
That is also a really great question. So startups, yeah, I've done a handful of startups myself, right? I tried to start this nonprofit for foster youth because I did a lot of work with foster youth over in Rosemead for college with an all-girls foster youth clinic. And I learned about, funding opportunities and things like that. And then I also got into technology startups, software development. To get started is to, again, get into really vetting out and laying out what your idea is, right? What problem is it trying to solve? Who are the customers that will benefit from from solving that problem, all right? And then defining in the middle, what is your solution? How do you layer it out? How do you do that? And doing research, right? To be quite frank, like if I'm going to start a tech company, right, I know for a fact that I'm not the one that is going to code that company. I need to find someone else, that I can get passionate about the startup and get them to buy into this vision that I have, right? Now I have someone else that shares that vision with me. We dialogue back and forth all the time, right? And he's building the technology while I've got my designated role in identifying customers, or doing the strategic understanding of like what is that field of expertise doing. Let's say I want to do a startup in environmental, right? I care deeply about the planet, right? Climate change is happening, those kinds of questions. How can I contribute, right? The best thing for people to do in middle school and high school is to read up and research as much as you possibly can, right? And don't take any research at face value. Just you read it, you understand it, ask questions about it, right? Not every perspective, is, a solid perspective. Don't just assume something is completely true, right? But at the same time, once you get to, a certain status, and you have an understanding of it, then that's great. Because you can't start a startup, you can't be an entrepreneur unless you are able to gauge or engage with those experts in those fields, right? So for example, if I'm doing, again, the climate change or an environmental startup, I will identify all the major stakeholders and professionals in the area. I will go up to all the universities and talk to their environmental liaison or their director of environmental. I will go to all the professional industries out there and network with them and just tell them my idea, share the idea, bounce it back and forth with them, and they can help guide you along the way. So that would be a great starting point, and actually put your idea on paper, start drafting it out, right? So again, doing your research, getting confident in the subject matter, and then going out there and networking and bouncing your ideas off of people, having dialogue. Don't be afraid to be wrong about things, right? And then there's another thing where it's like, I have an idea to do something innovative. I have an idea to save the world, so to speak, right? But, I'm too scared to share that with anybody, right? Because I'm afraid that I might be wrong. I'm afraid that this idea might be stupid or might get shut down. Don't be afraid of that. Move forward, and you might have to change your idea a little bit or divert into another path or get very specific, right? Your idea might be this big. It's like, I want to help environment, right? Okay, so what do you want to help in the environment? I want to help getting into water sustainability, getting into electricity, getting into battery technology, getting into, conservation efforts, which means like, saving otters in Monterey Bay or things like that. So, yeah.
Okay, well, I think that was going to be our last question.
Oh, sure.
So we're going to wrap it up. We'll be back tomorrow, and we'll see you guys then.
Yeah.
Take care.
Yeah, thanks, everybody. And again, feel free to reach out to our coordinators about, connecting in the future. I don't want this to be a one-time thing. I'm happy to come and speak, if we're able to work that out. So again, best of luck and hope to hear from people in the future.